What's up, everyone? Welcome to the video. We are here talking week 8 of the NFL season for DraftKings and FanDuel. And if this is your first time here, what's up? My name is Chris Pennell. I break down NASCAR and NFL DFS each and every single week on this channel. And in these videos specifically, what I like to do is go position by position, just the players that I'm looking at, because if we went over the entire slate, that would take forever. I like to build a lineup more so for single entries as we progress through it, and then around the optimizer at the end that has my projections and ownership projections as of right now on Friday morning to see who's popping the most for the time being. But keep in mind, a lot of things can change injury-wise over the course of the weekend. And if you think that all sounds great, well, the one thing you can do in return for me, and it's free, leave a like on the video, subscribe to the channel if you haven't yet done so, and feel free to leave a comment down below asking any questions if you happen to have any, or if you just want to make fun of me, well, I can't stop you. And as always, we will start with the quarterbacks here, and if you do want access to the spreadsheet that I'm showing you guys for free on YouTube, link is down below in the description for that. It's got the entire player pool, projections, ownership projections, cheat sheets, Discord community, and of course the optimizer, which I will run at the end. And I do cover the NBA as well. That goes on each and every single day. So if you would like access to that, like I said, link down below. Also, dealing with a sore throat, so hopefully my voice doesn't sound too bad, but oh well, I guess I can't fix it. So anyway, let's talk quarterbacks. We have Jalen Hurts, $83 on DraftKings, $92 over on FanDuel. The quarterback slate sucks this week. Like, really, the only two quarterbacks I want to roster are Jalen Hurts and Tua. That is about it, but I did add 3 other guys just for the sake of conversation here, but it's bad. Like, there's no Patrick Mahomes, there's no Josh Allen, there's no Lamar Jackson, no Joe Burrow. It's just a really rough quarterback slate. So the ownership is going to be very concentrated on 2 guys, and the first 2 guys that we are going to talk about. But anyway, just getting back to Hurts here. The Eagles should be able to stomp the Pittsburgh Steelers. I don't really have any concerns about that. They're playing at home. They're undefeated. The Steelers, just not that great of a team. 27-point implied team total here. 10.5-point favorite. And if you're looking at Hurts' numbers this year, he's been pretty darn good. Now, the passing department, it is what it is. I would say it's better than years past. A.J. Brown's definitely been a big boost to this offense, but still only 250 passing yards per game, 1 passing touchdown, only throwing the ball 27 times per game, but a nice 80% completion percentage. But the reason we like to play Jalen Hurts is because what he can do with his legs. Nearly 50 rushing yards per game, close to 10 designed runs per game. That's not counting scrambles, so it's actually more than that if you're looking at game logs, and a rushing touchdown per game. That is absolutely incredible. So that's 6 points for the rushing touchdown, plus 5 points for the rushing yards. So that's basically a built-in 11.4 of just what he can do on the ground. There's always upside for more, plus whatever he can do with his arm through the air with guys like A.J. Brown, Devonta Smith, and of course Dallas Goedert. So I'm liking him here quite a bit. If you have enough money to make this work, he is definitely the only spend-up quarterback I think on the slate that's worth even thinking about. I don't know the second most expensive quarterback in the slate, but there's definitely a big teardrop after Jalen Hurts this weekend. Looking at the matchup versus Pittsburgh, they're 24th versus fantasy quarterbacks, allowing nearly 300 passing yards per game, and then also mid-pack DVA versus the pass. So if you have the money for it, I definitely like Jalen Hurts this weekend. And then dropping down to the chalk du jour, we have Tua here at $6,200. Not really sure what's going on with the pricing here, but it's a nice matchup on the road in Detroit in the Dome. 51.5-point over-under, 27.5-point implied team total here, and a 3.5-point favorite. This game is going to be the nuts for fantasy purposes this weekend. It's going to have all the ownership, and it's very easy to stack with Tua because we know where the ball is going. It's going to Jalen Waddle, and it's going to Tyreek Hill, and then the obvious run back option is Amon-Ra St. Brown, assuming he is good to go this weekend. Also looks like DeAndre Swift will be back, so that makes things interesting as well. But for Tua, 260 passing yards per game, just under 2 passing touchdowns, 8.6 yards per attempt. Doesn't really run the ball too much, plus he's dealing with some scrambled egg brain the past few weeks. I don't think they're going to want him to really go out there too much and risk re-injury. But the matchup here is why everyone's going to want to play him. The Detroit Lions have been awful defensively this year. 31st DVA versus the pass, and allowing the 5th most points per game to fantasy quarterbacks. So really, I don't see a reason not to like Tua here. If you're playing cash games, he's going to be the guy you get to. Unless you want to punt with Sam down there at $4,000. But for me personally, I think Tua is going to be the best way to go. And like I said, the stacking options are simple, and it's really not that hard to fit because Tua is not that expensive. And then, like I said, Hurts and Tua are really the only 2 quarterbacks I want to roster, but the thing is, everyone's going to have the same thought process, so we had to find at least some other guys to talk about. And Derek Carr didn't look terrible to me at $5,900 facing New Orleans on the road. 49.5-point over-under in this game, 25.5-point implied team total, 1.5-point spread, so it should be pretty back and forth. And while I'm not a huge fan of using Derek Carr for DFS purposes, and plus it's only $300 more to get to a guy like Tua, or even $200 less for a guy like Daniel Jones, who at least has some rushing upside, it's going to be hard for me to click on Derek Carr's name. But if you want to stack this game up, I think going with Carr and Devontae Adams, you could also throw in Darren Waller if you want, or one of the other wide receivers like Hunter Renfrow or Matt Collins, and then run it back with a guy like Chris Olave or Alvin Kamara. I think it's a viable way to go. It's just, man, it's really hard to get excited about Derek Carr. But once you look at the quarterback landscape on this slate, he honestly doesn't look like the worst thing in the world. And then Daniel Jones here at $5,700. The only reason I have interest here is because of the matchup versus Seattle and the fact that he can run the ball, and he's pretty good at it too. He had over 100 rushing yards, I believe, in a game recently. Might have even been last week. I had to look back at that, but either way, he's actually averaging more rushing yards per game than Jalen Hurts this season. Only 49 runs per game, no 2.5 yards per carry, but a nice 81% completion percentage. But they don't throw the ball that much, only 24 times per game. I like Saquon Barkley quite a bit in this one versus Seattle. He'd be the guy I prefer to get to rather than the passing attack for the New York Giants. But being on the road in Seattle, it's a beatable matchup. They're 19th DVA versus the pass and 23rd versus fantasy quarterbacks this year. If you're just looking for a cheap quarterback that has the ability to run the ball, Daniel Jones would be your guy this weekend in a plus matchup. And then if you're looking for the 4K punt, he is starting in place for Matt Ryan, who got benched. And look, I'm not expecting much here, but Washington's not a great defense this year versus the pass. 29th DVOA and 20th versus fantasy quarterbacks. I'm not expecting much, but if he can hook up with Michael Pittman a couple of times or one of the tight ends, or maybe even Alec Pierce, it's not, you could definitely do worse at $4,000. I think people will go this route to jam in some studs. Personally, for me, I would rather go the Tua route in cash games, but I do understand going with the 4K punt, but definitely not excited about it. And moving over to our lineup, like I said, there is two quarterbacks I like, and as you can see here, I forgot who the other expensive quarterbacks were. Well, we only have one guy in the 7K range, and that's Kyler Murray at $7,500, and then we have Dak, and then we're already to 6.2K Tua. So like I said, ownership is going to be very concentrated on two quarterbacks in my opinion this week. And for this build specifically, I know it's chalk, but guess what? I can do whatever I want here. So we're going to roster Tua. And then I think the pass catching options are quite obvious, but we'll save that to when we hit wide receivers. And moving on to the running backs, actually looks like a pretty good position this week. Usually it's a spot where there's a few guys that look viable and the ownership is pretty concentrated on a few guys, but I could see it being pretty spread out this weekend. And we'll start up top with Derrick Henry, $8,400. Me personally, I'm probably not going to play him. I just haven't really been a big fan of spending it for running backs this year. I think the cheaper guys can give us somewhat similar value. But Derrick Henry does own the Houston Texans, does have part ownership of that franchise. He just absolutely murders them each and every single time he faces them. And the volume's still been great this year, 22 carries per game, nearly a rushing touchdown per game. Just hasn't been as efficient. Usually he's above a 5 yards per carry kind of guy, only sitting at 4 this season. But 2.5 targets per game, 20 receiving yards. And it's just really the matchup here for me. I mean, the Houston Texans are so bad defensively versus the run. 32nd DVOA, allowing 33.4 DraftKings points per game, which is the most, and over 130 rushing yards and over rushing touchdowns. So if you're just playing matchups here, Derrick Henry is definitely in a great spot. But always the thing with him is if he doesn't score a touchdown, you're probably not going to be happy with the output. But I think the chances are pretty high that he does do that in this game. Saquon Barkley, $8,100. Like if I had to pick between Derrick Henry and Saquon Barkley, I'm going to take Saquon because of the slight discount plus the extra pass catching opportunities that he does offer us. And he's been better on the ground this year than Derrick Henry, over 100 rushing yards per game on 20 rushing attempts and over 5 yards per carry with his near 17% target share. And plus the matchup versus Seattle is pretty good. They're allowing nearly 7 catches per game to running backs, about 60 receiving yards. They're also allowing the 4th most points per game to the running back position, as well as being 17th DVA versus the run. So I do like Saquon if you do have the extra money to spend it for him. And the quarterbacks aren't that expensive outside of Jalen Hurts this week, so it probably won't be a super hard thing to do. Josh Jacobs, $7,500. He has been on fire the past 3 weeks. Well over 100 rushing yards. He gets into the end zone almost every single week and has more involvement in the passing game. So he's absolutely killing it. I wasn't super high on Jacobs heading into the season, but he's definitely proved me wrong. But I'm not super high on him in this game, but I just think just from the volume standpoint, and at $7,500, he's definitely in play. But the Saints' run defense has been pretty good for a couple of years now, and if you're looking at what they've done this season versus running backs, it's not great. They're 19th DVA versus the run, but they're also 12th in fantasy points allowed per game, but over 100 rushing yards. I think Jacobs is fine, but if he does not get to the end zone, you're probably not going to be extremely happy with the output because he's not an elite pass catching running back. But the targets have been up this year, which is nice to see. Alvin Kamara, $7,100. Like if I had to decide between Jacobs and Kamara, I feel like Kamara would be the guy I'd rather get to just because more involved in the passing game and still very good on the ground, 70 rushing yards and 15 carries. But nearly 6.5 targets per game on 40 receiving yards and a 20% target share. And the Raiders have been a little bit worse versus running backs this season, ranking 22nd versus that position, as well as being 20th DVA versus the run, and allowing 7 catches and 55 receiving yards per game to running backs. Although that number is a bit noisy because it really depends on what kind of running back you are facing. And they did have to face Austin Eckler, to be fair. Kenneth Walker, $6,500. He went nuclear last week, had that really nice, 75-yard touchdown near the end of the game to even boost his stats even more. But he's sitting at 6 yards per carry this season. Sample size is a little bit smaller than others because he wasn't starting until Pennell got hurt. But ever since he had the starting role, he has been awesome. Plus, the matchup is pretty good here versus the Giants. And I know they're allowing the 12th fewest points per game to fantasy running backs, but they're also 30th DVA versus the run and allowing nearly 120 rushing yards per game. And Travis Etienne did have a pretty good game versus them last week. And I think Kenneth Walker is certainly capable of doing something similar. Ramondre Stevenson, $6,400. Damian Harris did return on Monday night versus the Bears, but he only played 17% of the snaps. Now, it was his first game back, so maybe they phase him in a little bit more this time. But Stevenson's clearly the best back in this offense, and it seems like the Patriots are realizing that, so I would assume he's going to get the most, or the bulk of the work going forward. I'd be very surprised if he doesn't. Even then, if they were still splitting snaps, I think you could still play Stevenson at $6,400, no problem here. Averaging 14 carries per game this year and 70 yards, 5 yards per carry, but he's more involved in the passing game, even if Harris does see more work this week and near 15% target share, which does make him safer on a PPR site like DraftKings. So I do like Stevenson, although the matchup's a little bit tough here versus the New York Jets, whose defense looked pretty good this year, and they're top 10 in fewest points allowed per game to the running back position. And then Dameon Pierce, not super excited about it, but he's a nice volume play at $6,300. It's just rostering Houston Texans is so awful because their implied team totals are always low every single week, and just watching the offense is not a fun time. But Dameon Pierce has been the bright spot for this team, nearly 20 carries per game, 85 rushing yards, 4.8 yards per carry, and we'll see some targets here and there, but the Titans are third DVA versus the run, so it's not like it's a great matchup. But a guy I have a ton of interest in because it sounds like Zeke is trending in the wrong direction, and if he happens to be out, Tony Pollard is going to be pretty much the best running back play on the slate versus the Chicago Bears. They've been awful versus the run this year, and if Zeke happens to miss, you could still play Pollard even if Zeke plays because I assume he's going to be somewhat limited, and even then Pollard is the better back. But at $6,100, as of right now, I have Zeke out in my projections. I believe Pollard's my second or third highest projected running back, and that's including guys like Derrick Henry, Saquon Barkley. He would project extremely well here versus Chicago. He's playing at home, 9.5-point favorite, 26-point implied team total. He's sitting at 5.6 yards per carry this season. Just doesn't get the volume to make him an elite fantasy back. But if Zeke is out, like I said, we're probably going to see around 20-some touches for Pollard. If that's the case, he is going to absolutely smash. The Bears are 24th DVA versus the run, 25th versus fantasy running backs. And as you can see here with the projections, I currently have him at 20.79. And that is only behind Derrick Henry, who's sitting at 21.57. So yeah, if Zeke is out, Pollard is an absolute must grab in cash games. And even in tournaments would be a very tough fade on both sides because he's cheap over on FanDuel at only $6,300. Then Raheem Mostert at $5,900. If you are playing Tua in the passing attack, you could still play Mostert because he is going to get some targets. Chase Edmonds is just pretty much an afterthought in that offense at this point. But if you are fading the passing attack, I would really recommend trying to get to Mostert here because I want some exposure to this Dolphins offense in just about all of my lineups. They have a 27.5 implied team total, the highest on the entire slate. 3.5-point favorites, and Detroit's just so bad versus the run. They're allowing the third most points per game, nearly 130 rushing yards, over 1.5 rushing touchdowns per game. They're also 29th DVA versus the run. And Mostert's a pretty good running back. When he gets opportunity, he's usually pretty good with it. Only sitting at 4.5 yards per carry this year, but he does get involved in the passing game a little bit. Did catch a touchdown last week, and he's going to get the bulk of the carries on the ground. So Mostert, if you don't have the passing attack, I really like trying to get to the run game at least. And moving back over to our lineup, there's a lot of running backs we could roster here. I'm not sure, since I'm going to plug in Tyreek Hill later, more than likely, that I should try to spend up for a running back. So I think trying to just stay in this mid-range is probably going to be the best way to go. We could have Kenneth Walker, Ramondre Stevenson. As of right now, I'm not sure what's going to happen with Zeke. He's a guy that can play without really practicing too much. But if we just go into the assumption that Zeke misses or he's very limited in this game, hard not to like Pollard at that price point. And then I guess I like Kenneth Walker. It's tough between him or Stevenson. I feel like I have Stevenson projected a little bit higher, but Walker is the guy I'm going to try to go with here. And that leaves us $5,200 left. I got to factor in I'm probably playing Hill, who's very expensive, but I still think we can make it work. And moving on to the wide receivers, not as many as I usually have on this list. Just not a lot of guys that popped out to me as much. And we are missing some of the best quarterbacks, so I guess that does make sense because their pairing options aren't here. But like I always say for wide receivers, it really all comes down to who am I using a quarterback? What's my stacking options with those guys? Who's my run back options in those stacks? Because yes, some of these guys are fine as one-offs for cash games here and there, and you can kind of dive into the matchups, but I don't really care about the matchups as much because a lot of times good wide receivers will beat out good corners or good defenses, so it's not usually a huge concern of mine. But we'll try to go through this quickly because, again, like I said, it all comes down to who we're using in tournaments. We'll start up top here with Justin Jefferson, $9,100, $9K on FanDuel. Gets a good spot here versus Arizona Cardinals. I didn't really talk about Kirk Cousins in the quarterback section, but I'd say he's on a short list of people that I think are playable at the quarterback spot. I think he's $6,100, but the Vikings have a 26-point implied team total. 3.5-point favorites here at home, 48.5-point over-under. It's actually a somewhat decent game to stack up. But really, I think most of my Vikings exposure would just specifically go to Justin Jefferson here as a one-off, maybe with Irv Smith here. And you don't even have to play the quarterbacks. You could kind of do a stack of DeAndre Hopkins and Justin Jefferson if you do want exposure to this game, but try to avoid the quarterbacks. I totally understand that. But Jefferson's been awesome this year, 110 yards per game, 10 targets, nearly a 30% target share. I don't think you guys need me to tell you that Justin Jefferson's good. It's just a matter of being able to afford him at that massive price point. Devontae Adams, if you're using Derek Carr, you basically have to use Adams because if Carr's going to have a good game, well, that pretty much means Adams has to have a good game because he's going to be the main threat here, and he's got the highest ceiling. And the Saints are allowing the 5th most points per game to fantasy wide receivers. And then if you are using Tua, you got to use either one of or both of Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle. Tyreek Hill's a lot more expensive, $2,000 more. But he's been great this year, 110 yards per game on 11 targets and a 31% target share. Also, I believe second in the league in air yards, only behind Chris Olave, who we'll talk about in a little bit. But yeah, if you're using Tua, love Tyreek, love Jalen Waddle. Both guys are fine options, both going to get the volume. And if you're looking at the matchup, Lions are 31st DVA versus the pass and 22nd versus fantasy wide receivers. Love both, but if you're in a pinch for money, Waddle's a little bit cheaper. DeAndre Hopkins, $7,400. Like I said, I kind of like this game, some of the skill position players, but not huge on the quarterbacks. But this price on Hopkins isn't bad. No Hollywood Brown in his return. He saw 14 targets versus the Saints, 10 catches for 100 yards. He had a 48% target share and a 60% market share of the team's air yards. I think that price point's pretty nice to get to, so I do like Hopkins in all formats. Amon-Ra St. Brown is the obvious run back option with your Dolphin stacks. He's $1,600. Left in concussion protocol last week. I guess he didn't actually end up having a concussion. He's still currently questionable, but if he's good to go, he's going to be very popular just because everyone's stacking the Dolphins, and he is the one run back option that you can count on consistently. I already talked about Waddle, Tyler Lockett with no DK Metcalf, more than likely. He's $6,500. Going to be the clear-cut wide receiver one. This offense for Geno Smith, he's already seen around 7.5 targets per game. Would not be surprised to see double digits in this one, and the price point's not too bad. I'm not a big fan of the passing attack in this game without DK Metcalf, but if you are rostering Geno Smith, you pretty much are tied to using Tyler Lockett because unless you want to use Noah Fant, there's no one else you can really count on too much target-wise. Then Chris Olave here, the air yards god this year. It looks like Michael Thomas is going to miss once again. He's $6,000. He's going to get the targets, and if you are stacking up the Raiders, he's going to be your obvious run back option here. He's seeing nearly 9 targets per game on a 27% target share and an ADOT of 16.3, and like I said, he is leading the league in air yards this season with a 41.5% market share of his team's air yards. DJ Moore, looks like he's going to be very chalky this week, but PJ Walker last weekend had a pretty good game, got into the end zone, I want to say close to 15 points, or might have been better than that, 19 points I want to say. I think it was close to 100 yards and a touchdown. Looks like he's going to be arguably the highest owned wide receiver on the slate because of the price point. Gets a good matchup here versus the Falcons. They are awful versus wide receivers this year. Just got absolutely torched by the Cincinnati Bengals, but they're dead last DVA versus the pass and allowing the most points per game to fantasy wide receivers, although the Bengals definitely did some damage on that. But either way, they're still not a great pass defense. So DJ Moore at that price point, I think is totally fine in cash games, although I'm afraid he's going to be a little bit too high owned in tournaments. Wan'Dale Robinson at $4,700. Kadarius Toney is gone. Not like Toney ever did anything for the Giants anyway, or has really been playing at all, so it doesn't make much of a difference. But he saw 8 targets last weekend, and overall, decent day. I think 12 or 11 fantasy points in back-to-back weeks for him. I think at $4,700, he's fine here. If you are using Daniel Jones, I think he's the obvious stacking option. But I will say the Seattle Seahawks have been pretty good versus wide receivers this year, allowing these 6th fewest points per game to the position. But there's not really any good cheap wide receivers this week, so I think Robinson's fine in a pinch. And then Garrett Wilson, I'm expecting to have some pretty decent ownership as well. $4,200. Looks like Corey Davis is going to miss this game. And Wilson's, I think, the most talented wide receiver of this bunch here. I think Elijah Moore might get some playing time this week, but he's seen 7 targets per game this year, 21% target share, but with Corey Davis being out, it just makes things a little bit easier on us. And then moving back over to our lineup, we're going to have to plug in Tyreek Hill. Now, if we can't afford him at the end, I have no problem at all dropping down Jalen Waddle to make things a little bit more balanced. But for right now, let's just try to squeeze him in. And then for the obvious run back option, Amon-Ra St. Brown's going to be the guy at $6,900. So if we go this route, that's just under $4,000 left per player, which I know doesn't seem great, but factor in a 2K-ish defense and probably a cheaper tight end, it might make it to where we can work, but I'd say there's a decent chance we might have to drop to Jalen Waddle, but I really want to try to fit in Tyreek. And then moving on to tight ends, not a super fun position this week, just kind of finding guys that are cheap enough and see some volume to make it work, but I honestly don't think I'd really try to single out any of these guys in my lineups. It's just really a matter of who fits and who doesn't. We don't have Travis Kelce, we have no Mark Andrews, so really it's just try to find some middling tight ends that you hope get into the end zone or just get a few catches. Dallas Goedert. If you're stacking up the Eagles, high implied team total, I'd say maybe a decent chance he can find the end zone here. But even then, he's averaging 0.17 touchdowns per game this year. But if you're using Jalen Hurts, he is a stacking option. But outside of that, $5,000, I feel like I can get similar upside out of guys like Higbee and Muth here. And speaking of Higbee, $4,200. He sees plenty of work. 8 targets per game, 22% target share, 42% weighted opportunity share. Only problem is his ADOT is super low, only 3.5, kind of similar to Dallas Goedert there. But at $4,200, he's a guy that's going to get you 5+ targets just about every single week. Freiermuth here, $3,900. If you are stacking the Eagles, he's a fine run back option. You could obviously always look at Pickens or Deontay Johnson. But if you're just looking for a cheap tight end here, the volume's usually pretty solid with this guy. He's seen nearly 7 targets per game, close to a 19% target share, and a 17% market share of the team's air yards and 51 receiving yards. Don't think he's bad below 4K at all. Mike Gesicki, $3,800. If you are stacking up to the passing attack for the Dolphins, he's a pretty cheap option there if you can't quite afford to get to guys like Tyreek Hill or Jalen Waddle and you're just looking for a cheap option. And while the targets weren't there early in the season, in back-to-back weeks he has seen 7 targets, which is nice. It still only equates to a 10.5% target share, but they had a 9.2. He's actually the best of all the tight ends on this slate. But if he does not score a touchdown, probably not going to be super happy with the output, but I do think the upside is there versus Detroit. Irv Smith at $3,500. He's seeing 4.5 targets per game. I think this is a decent game for fantasy options. Not a huge fan of the quarterbacks here, but it is a weak quarterback slate, so I think it's fine. If you want to use Kirk Cousins, stack him up with Justin Jefferson and Irv Smith, I got no problem with that. He's cheap, and he does have some touchdown upside near the red zone. And if you're looking for the pure punt here, we have Noah Fant at $2,800. He's seeing close to 4 targets per game. I think he only had 1 point last week, but I believe he saw 7 targets in week 6. You can't expect too much here, but if you're just looking for a guy that sees playing time, he's on the field, and with no DK Metcalf, maybe we see an uptick in usage here. He's $2,800 though. He's dirt cheap, and that's really the only nice thing I can say about him. And then moving on to the defenses, what I always do is I scroll all the way down to the bottom, look at some Vegas totals here, and see what looks the most viable. I don't really want to play any of these bottom tier defenses. I think the Commanders are fine. Low total here at 39.5, only 3-point dogs. Looking at the matchup here, I believe they're playing the Colts, which I'm not too scared of the Colts offense. Texans would be okay versus the Titans, 40.5 point over under, only 2.5 point dogs at home. Rams be okay. I think the Texans and Commanders are probably the best cheap options there. And then if you're looking to go a little bit more expensive, the Patriots versus the Jets with no Breece Hall, only a 19-point implied team total against them. I think that's fine. On the flip side, I think you'd also put the Jets. And then obviously, if you can afford the Cowboys, sure, go for it. If you can afford the expensive defenses, I don't have any problems with that. But it looks like the 49ers, Patriots, Jets, Commanders, and the Texans look the best to me as of right now. And as far as point per dollar wise, it looks like the 49ers graded the best for me. And moving over to our lineup to finish this off, I would love to double stack with Jalen Waddle. I just don't think it's going to be that possible. And yes, I know the sun's starting to attack me here, but I think we'll be done just in time before it does. But I just don't think we're going to have the salary for it. So let's plug in a cheap defense to see what kind of money we actually have to work with. I think the Commanders, I said, was the one I wanted to go the lowest on. So we'll plug in just the cheapest defense that I think is viable. Now, if we do try to plug in Waddle, that leaves me $3,250 left, which, yeah, if we plug in a cheap tight end like Noah Fant here at $2,800, it's possible. But there's really no one in that 3K range that I think is super viable this week, especially for a single entry tournament. So I'm going to try to go away from that. But I would like to double stack with Tua here. So we could go with Mike Gesicki here at $3,800. And that leaves us just under $5,000 remaining, which does seem a little bit better because if we plug in the guy like Garrett Wilson at $4,200, someone I like quite a bit this week, leaves you $5,200 left, which it's all right. It's not a ton of money to play with. But it would get you a guy like, well, don't love Hines, don't love London. I played London more than I should have this year, and it's not been fun most weeks. DJ Moore I like, and I'm only 100 away. So if I drop the guy like Kenneth Walker, I think Stevenson's $6,400. And yeah, that's not a bad looking lineup. You also have Dameon Pierce there if you want to go that route, but I don't hate that. So you got Tua stacked with Tyreek Hill and Mike Gesicki. Ran back with Amon-Ra St. Brown. You have Pollard and Stevenson at running back. Then Garrett Wilson and DJ Moore as fill-ins with the Commanders defense. Don't think that's a terrible looking single entry build. Please don't copy and paste that though. It's only Friday morning. I'm sure I'm going to change my mind about a few things by the time Sunday rolls around. So please use your best judgment when building lineups. Like I said earlier, doing it on the optimizer here to see who's popping the most as of right now. But we're just raw dogging it. No settings, no randomness, no groups, anything like that. But if you are someone that is building 150 lineups, please make sure you put those in place, which you can do in the optimizer. And if you do want access to this, the link is down below in the description if you want to build your own lineups. But I just want to see who's popping the most as of right now with raw projections and ownership. And it looks like we got our 152 crunch here. So let's pull up the players tab. And as you can see, we're already seeing a lot of Tua, lots of some other people we talked about. But yeah, Tony Pollard, this was with the assumption that Zeke is out. This could obviously change, but that played him in 100% of the lineups. Tyreek Hill in 95%, tons of DJ Moore, lots of Stevenson, lots of Wilson. Jacobs, way too much Sam. Please don't do this. I'm probably not even going to play him this week, but for how cheap he is, he's going to pop and use projections because I have him at 16 points. So yeah, it's going to pop at 4K to fit in some studs. But personally for me, if I was building 150, I would not even come close to that. So that's something you always have to play around with your own exposures. Lots of Tua, Fants to fit in some other things. But yeah, not really too surprised at who's popping here. Looking at teams, lots of Miami, Dallas because of Pollard, New England, Carolina, Jets, all teams that we talked about. And then for the games, New Orleans and Las Vegas is getting a lot of exposure, the Jets and New England, which doesn't sound like a fun fantasy game, but there is a couple guys there that a lot of people are going to play, like Stevenson, like Wilson. So yeah, not too surprised. It's always nice to see when the projections line up with your own personal thoughts. And like I said, if you want access to this, link is down below in the description. But with that being said, that's all I got for you guys this week. I hope you did enjoy, and if you did, make sure you leave a like on the video and subscribe on your way out if you haven't yet done so. But I wish you all the best of luck. Sorry if I sound a little bit weird, but my throat is absolutely killing me. But I will have my prize picks video posted on Saturday morning if you're interested in that. But with that being said, wish you all the best of luck, and I'll see you all next time.